The courtroom was packed, hot and tense, every seat taken, every breath tight. At the front, Officer Brent Mallory adjusted his collar, straightened his chest, and smirked. His badge gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights like a crown he never earned, but wielded like a sword. A line of petty defendants shuffled before the judge, and then came her, Nadia Reyes, calm, controlled, dressed in a plain gray blazer and flats. She looked like any other overworked woman trying to get through the day, except she didn't fidget, didn't glance around nervously. She stood like stone. Officer Mallory tilted his head and whispered to the prosecutor, chuckling. She parked illegally outside the station, argued, no license on her. Didn't cooperate. His voice was full of smugness, like he was bragging about some wild animal he'd cornered. But he left something out. The way he'd yelled at her in front of her 8-year-old son. The way he'd slammed the hood of her car, snatched her purse, called her just another one of them. It wasn't about parking. It never was. The judge scanned the docket and raised an eyebrow. Miss Reyes, how do you plead? Nadia looked up slowly, voice steady. Not guilty, Your Honor, but I request dismissal on constitutional grounds. Mallory scoffed. She's not even a lawyer. A quiet ripple moved through the room. The prosecutor blinked. Wait, what grounds? Nadia opened the folder in her hand and began to recite case law, fluently, precisely, like someone who had done this before. Mallory approached without probable cause. The stop violated Terry v. Ohio. He then searched my bag without consent, breaching Arizona v. Gant. The arrest, therefore, was unlawful. The judge blinked, now genuinely curious. Mallory stepped forward, jaw tightening. She's bluffing. But Nadia wasn't bluffing. She wasn't just a mother who got pulled over. She wasn't just a brown woman Mallory thought he could intimidate. The courtroom watched as she laid out a timeline, citations, and photographic evidence from her phone. Calm, polished, unshaken. The smirk on Officer Mallory's face began to slip. For the first time in years, he didn't feel untouchable. And for the first time in his career, someone on the other side of his badge had come prepared for war, armed not with weapons, but with truth. Brent Mallory didn't become a cop to serve and protect. He became one to feel bigger than he was. In high school, he was average. In the academy, mediocre. But with a badge on his chest, suddenly he was someone. And every time someone questioned him, especially someone who looked like her, he dug in deeper. That day outside the precinct, it wasn't just about a parking space. It was about power. Nadia Reyes had pulled up to pick up her son, Leo, from the nearby library. A quiet afternoon, sunlit and slow. But when Mallory saw her car in the wrong zone, it was like something inside him snapped. "Move the car now," he barked. Nadia had explained calmly, kindly. Her son would be out in 30 seconds. She showed him the hazard lights. She even offered to circle around. But Mallory wanted submission, not reason. Leo had come out right as his mother's purse was snatched from her hands. The boy froze, backpack still hanging off one shoulder. "Mom?" he called. Mallory turned on him next. "Stay back, kid." But Leo didn't move. He watched as his mother was handcuffed, her groceries spilled onto the sidewalk. People were filming. Some gasped. One woman begged Mallory to stop. "She didn't do anything!" But it was done. Nadia was shoved into the squad car. Mallory didn't even look back. That night, Leo didn't speak. He just stared at the front door, waiting for his mother. When she finally came home hours later, bruised and tired, he wrapped his arms around her and didn't let go. "I hate him," Leo whispered. Nadia knelt down, placed her hands on his shoulders, and said the words that would define everything that came next. "We don't hate. We prove." She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she pulled out the same law textbooks she hadn't touched in years. Ones from a past life she'd left behind to raise her son alone. She made tea, opened a legal pad, and began to write. Every timeline, every violation, every mistake Mallory had made. And she found them. Not just in her case, but in dozens. Her arrest was no accident. It was a pattern. And it was time someone ended it. Brent Mallory had been on the force for nearly 12 years, and in that time, he had built a wall of silence around his mistakes. Internal affairs files went missing. Complaints were marked resolved without investigation. Witnesses were scared into silence, or just ignored altogether. And the courts? They rarely questioned him. Why would they? He was the one wearing the uniform. But this time, he made a critical mistake. He took his arrogance into the courtroom, underestimating the woman who stood on the other side of the aisle. Nadia Reyes was not here to win her case. She was here to pull down the whole system that let him act like a god. She began digging. First, into her own arrest report, riddled with contradictions. Mallory claimed she resisted. Body cam footage? Deactivated. He claimed she had no ID. Yet booking records showed her license was logged immediately. Then she pulled court records, cases tied to Mallory's name. 36 arrests over 4 years, almost all involving women of color. Most pled out. Few had lawyers. A pattern began to emerge. Small infractions blown out of proportion. Aggressive escalation, missing footage. Nadia started building a file. Not a legal brief, a war chest, photos, witness statements, FOIA requests. She worked during the day, studied at night, and she kept it all quiet until the day Mallory took the stand. It was routine. He adjusted his cuffs, cleared his throat, and swore to tell the truth. The suspect was uncooperative. She refused to move her vehicle. She raised her voice. "I felt threatened." His voice was confident, practiced. The judge nodded, bored. The prosecutor leaned back. Then came Nadia's turn. She stood up slowly, walked to the center of the room and said, "Officer Mallory, do you recognize this man?" She clicked the projector. A blurry photo. A black man in a hoodie. Arrested 3 years prior. Mallory frowned. "No," another click. "And her?" "A Latina teenager, handcuffed outside a gas station." "No," Mallory replied again, more hesitant. Then came a third, a fourth, a fifth. "You don't remember any of these people?" Nadia asked. "They were all arrested by you, under similar circumstances. Yet all had missing footage, and all filed complaints, ignored by your department." Murmurs filled the courtroom. The judge sat upright. Mallory stammered. That's not relevant." Nadia stepped closer. "It is relevant. Because I'm not just defending myself. I'm exposing you." For the first time, the judge asked Nadia to continue. And with every slide, every name, every timestamp, the myth of Brent Mallory, the man who hid behind the badge, began to crumble. The courthouse hallway was unusually quiet after Nadia's cross-examination. Reporters who'd come for a simple parking dispute were now huddled outside, whispering into phones. A few began live streaming. Someone tweeted, "Local mom exposes dirty cop in court. This is wild." Mallory stepped into the corridor, fists clenched, rage boiling under his skin. He wasn't just angry, he was afraid. For the first time in his career, someone wasn't afraid of him. And worse, they were smarter. Behind him, his attorney whispered, "We need to talk, privately." But it was already too late. Word was spreading fast. In the corner of the hallway, a young woman sat quietly, watching. Her name was Tara Neal. She had been one of Mallory's victims 2 years ago, wrongfully arrested outside a subway station. Charges dropped, but her life never recovered. She had seen Nadia's post on a legal forum late last night. "Were you mistreated by Officer Mallory? I'm compiling cases. Please reach out." Tara had reached out. So had 7 others. Nadia had created a secure folder, shared with lawyers, journalists, and civil rights groups. And now it was more than just her story. It was a movement. Inside the courtroom, Judge Patterson reviewed the documents Nadia had submitted. She hadn't gone through a lawyer, she was the lawyer now. Unofficial, yes, but brilliant, sharp, fearless. Mallory's side tried to object. "Your Honor, this is a traffic infraction." "She's grandstanding." But the judge raised his hand. "She's uncovering something deeply troubling. I will allow it." Then came the next bombshell. Nadia requested to subpoena Mallory's internal affairs records. The courtroom froze. "Denied," Mallory's attorney barked. But Nadia smiled gently. "I've already filed a writ in Superior Court. And the journalists outside? They've submitted a FOIA request. You can't bury this anymore." That night, Nadia sat on her porch, phone buzzing nonstop. One message stood out, from the mother of a boy named Elijah, arrested for jaywalking last year, and left bruised and bloodied. The mother wrote, "They told me we had no chance, that no one would believe us, but now, maybe they will." Nadia stared at the screen for a long time. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, from the weight of what she was lifting. She had never wanted this. She didn't want the spotlight. She just wanted safety for her son, justice for herself. But the world had given her a war, and she was learning how to fight it in heels and heartbreak. Brent Mallory's name was no longer confined to a courtroom docket. It was now in headlines, hashtags, and think pieces. Badge and burden began trending nationwide. What started as one mother's refusal to back down had become a digital avalanche. Civil rights lawyers, retired judges, and former officers began speaking out. Whistleblowers came forward. It turned out people had always known. They just hadn't spoken. Until now. At the precinct, the atmosphere turned cold. Officers stopped meeting Mallory's eyes in the locker room. His captain avoided him entirely. He tried to hold on to power the only way he knew. By threatening. "I'll sue for defamation. I'll get her countersued for harassment," he snapped in a meeting. But even his union rep looked uneasy. "You should lay low, Brent," he said flatly. "There's heat coming. The kind we can't shield you from." A special investigation had been opened quietly that morning, and 2 deputies from Internal Affairs walked past his desk without a word. He was still in uniform, still had his badge, but he no longer had control. Meanwhile, Nadia had become something of a mythic figure, though she hadn't asked for it. Parents brought her flowers outside her apartment. College students campaigned to get her a speaking gig. But inside, she was still just tired, still healing, still a woman who hadn't planned for any of this. Her son, Leo, watched her from the hallway as she reviewed another case file. "Mom," he said, "do you wish this never happened?" Nadia closed her laptop and looked at him. "Sometimes," she whispered, "but then I remember. What if it happens to someone else's mom?" That night, a package arrived at her door, unmarked. Inside was a USB drive and a printed photo. A teenage boy, face bruised, lips swollen. The note simply read, "Mallory did this. The station buried it. My brother never came home the same." Nadia plugged the drive into her laptop and gasped. It was a full dashcam recording, undisclosed, never entered into evidence. Mallory screaming, dragging the boy, slamming his head against a patrol car, and laughing. It wasn't just brutality, it was joy. The next day in court, Nadia handed the footage to the judge in a sealed envelope. "This isn't about my ticket anymore, Your Honor," she said quietly. "It's about a man who used the badge to hunt instead of serve." For the first time, the judge didn't just look at her like a defendant. He looked at her like a warning the system had ignored. The courtroom fell silent. Mallory shifted in his seat, his face pale, because he finally knew this wasn't going away. And this time, no one was going to clean up his mess. The courtroom was standing room only. Word had spread. Officer Brent Mallory was being summoned for a pre-disciplinary hearing under oath. This time not as a witness, but as the accused. News cameras lined the steps outside. Protesters held signs reading, "Justice for Leo," "Protect, Don't Punish," and "How many more?" Mallory arrived in a wrinkled suit, his eyes bloodshot, his confidence drained. He didn't walk like a man anymore. He walked like a storm survivor. Knowing the levee had finally cracked, Nadia sat at the front, composed, flanked by a quiet coalition. Tara Neal, Elijah's mother, a retired police captain who had flown in from another state just to testify. These were the people Mallory's badge had silenced. Today they were his reckoning. The judge, a federal appointee brought in for impartiality, took the bench. "We are convened today not for a trial," he began, "but for truth." His voice was steady. "Officer Mallory, you are to answer under penalty of perjury. Do you understand?" Mallory nodded once. The prosecutor stood. "We have a series of questions regarding your conduct in over a dozen arrests where force was used disproportionately. Let's start with this one." A video began to play. It was the dashcam footage Nadia had submitted. The teenage boy. The courtroom was silent, a collective breath held in horror. "Is that you in the video, officer?" He swallowed. "Yes." "Did you report using force that day?" "No." "Why not?" He was resisting." "That's not what the footage shows." Mallory blinked. "I don't know. Maybe it didn't need to go in the report." That was the moment it all collapsed. Witness after witness followed, each sharing stories so eerily similar, it no longer felt like coincidence. One woman described being pulled over for a broken taillight, only to be dragged from her car. A young man explained how he'd been accused of loitering outside his own apartment complex and ended up with a concussion. They all described the same thing, a man who acted without fear of being held accountable. Then Nadia spoke. She stood slowly, her voice clear. "I was never trying to destroy a man. I was trying to protect my son from growing up in a world where that man gets to decide who matters. I didn't set out to be a hero. I just refused to be silent." The room was still. Even Mallory couldn't look at her. Because in that moment everyone knew. She wasn't the problem. She was the proof that the system had one. By the end of the hearing, Brent Mallory was no longer an officer, at least not in the eyes of the public. The department released a quiet statement. "Officer Mallory has been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending further review." But Nadia knew what that meant. They were hoping the storm would pass. They thought she would stop now that her case had gone viral. But Nadia didn't come this far to let it end in silence. The next day, she filed a formal civil rights lawsuit, not just against Mallory, but against the city, the precinct, and the captain who'd signed off on all those fake reports. Her legal knowledge, once dormant, now surged like fire through her veins. She teamed up with a civil liberties organization. Pro bono lawyers offered help. Donations poured in. What began as self-defense had become a legal revolution. She wasn't alone anymore. Mallory, meanwhile, began to spiral. Paparazzi waited outside his house. Protesters left chalk outlines on his driveway. His wife left him. His savings began to drain from mounting legal fees. But worst of all, he couldn't go anywhere without seeing his name tied to disgrace. He'd spent years making people feel small. Now he was the one shrinking in grocery store aisles, behind tinted car windows, under a hoodie pulled too low. And it was only going to get worse. An independent oversight committee opened an audit into all his arrests. 17 were overturned. 4 wrongful convictions were vacated. One man who had spent 2 years in prison because of Mallory's testimony was released and walked free with tears in his eyes, whispering, "Tell her thank you. Tell Nadia thank you." She hadn't just fought for herself. She'd dismantled a chain of injustice, link by link. The media tried to spin it. Is Nadia Reyes a hero or a disruptor? One anchor asked on air, but the world had already answered. At Leo's school, teachers now nodded respectfully at drop-off. Parents whispered her name with pride. She had become what every mother hopes to be in her child's eyes. Not perfect, but brave. Strong and willing to face down giants. Late one night, as she tucked Leo into bed, he looked up at her and said, "Mom, do you think they'll ever stop people like him?" She paused, thought deeply, and then replied, "No, not all of them. But if enough of us stand up one by one, maybe they'll start to fall." The courtroom was still. The judge read the verdict slowly, clearly. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Nadia Reyes." A quiet gasp rippled through the gallery. The lawsuit had succeeded. Brent Mallory, the city, and the department were found liable for violating Nadia's civil rights. The damages awarded? 7 figures. But the money wasn't the victory. It was the acknowledgement. The court had finally said out loud what so many had suffered in silence. What happened to her was wrong. And it was never just about her. Mallory sat frozen, face blank. His lawyer whispered something, but he didn't hear it. He was no longer Officer Mallory. He was just a man, stripped of power, exposed for what he'd done. No rank, no shield, just the weight of every life he had trampled. As the judge exited, the press surged forward. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust forward. "Ms. Reyes, do you have a statement?" Nadia paused, took a breath, and spoke just 6 words. This wasn't justice. It was correction. Then she turned and walked away. No victory lap, no raised fists. Just dignity. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in applause, but Nadia moved quietly through them, holding Leo's hand. The boy looked up at her, eyes wide. "Does this mean it's over?" She smiled. "No, baby. It means we've made it safer for the next mother, for the next kid. That's what matters." And in that moment, Leo stood taller, as if the world had given him something new. The belief that even broken systems can be challenged, and sometimes defeated. Over the following months, the fallout was enormous. The police chief resigned. A task force on racial bias in law enforcement was launched, and new legislation passed, requiring body cams to stay active, officers with multiple complaints to be flagged, and arrest reviews by independent civilian boards. Nadia's stand had forced change, real change, but she didn't chase the spotlight. She went back to work at her community clinic. She helped neighbors fill out forms, walked kids to the bus, started teaching a night class on civil rights at the community center. She didn't become famous. She became necessary, powerful not because of the court's ruling, but because she proved that one voice, even one thought to be powerless, can shake a kingdom built on fear. And Mallory? He disappeared from public view. No interviews, no apologies, just silence. Some say he moved to another state. Others say he changed his name. But what they all agree on is this: he'll never wear a badge again.